The issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation in January 1863 was a pivotal moment in the American Civil War and a turning point in the history of the United States. President Abraham Lincoln's decision to issue the proclamation was not only a military strategy but also a profound statement on the moral and political direction of the war. The Emancipation Proclamation declared that all slaves in the Confederate-held territories were free as of January 1, 1863. While it did not immediately free all enslaved people, the proclamation fundamentally altered the nature of the Civil War, transforming it from a conflict focused solely on preserving the Union into one that also sought the end of slavery. The issuance of the Emancipation Proclamation came after nearly 2 years of brutal fighting, during which the Union struggled to secure a decisive victory. Lincoln had long been pressured by abolitionists and radical Republicans to take a stronger stance against slavery, but he was cautious about alienating the border states, slave-holding states like Kentucky and Maryland that had remained loyal to the Union. However, after the Battle of Antietam in September 1862, Lincoln saw an opportunity to make a bold move. Although the battle was not a decisive Union victory, it was enough of a strategic success for Lincoln to issue the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation on September 22, 1862. The preliminary proclamation declared that if the Confederate States did not return to the Union by January 1, 1863, their slaves would be declared free. When the Confederacy refused to comply, Lincoln followed through with the final Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st. The proclamation applied only to the states in rebellion, meaning that slavery was still legal in the border states and Union-held parts of the Confederacy. Nevertheless, it was a critical first step toward the abolition of slavery and had far-reaching consequences for the Union war effort and the course of the conflict. One of the immediate effects of the Emancipation Proclamation was its impact on the Union's war effort. By making the war explicitly about ending slavery, Lincoln hoped to weaken the Confederacy's ability to sustain its war effort. The Confederacy's economy and military were heavily reliant on slave labor, with enslaved people working in fields, factories, and even as laborers for the Confederate Army. By declaring these enslaved people free, the Union aimed to disrupt the Southern economy and encourage enslaved individuals to flee or resist their masters. The proclamation also gave the Union Army a new source of manpower. For the first time, African Americans were allowed to enlist in the Union Army, and the Emancipation Proclamation opened the door for thousands of formerly enslaved and free African Americans to join the fight for their own freedom. This decision not only bolstered Union forces, but also gave African Americans an active role in shaping the outcome of the war. Among the most famous of these African American units was the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, one of the first official African American unions in the Union Army. The 54th Massachusetts, commanded by Colonel Robert Gould Shaw, became a symbol of bravery and dedication of African American soldiers. In July 1863, the regiment famously led an assault on Fort Wagner, a heavily defended Confederate fort in South Carolina. Although the assault was unsuccessful and many of the regiment's soldiers were killed, the bravery displayed by the 54th Massachusetts helped change public perception of African American soldiers. Their courage in battle demonstrated that African Americans were not only capable of fighting, but were also deeply committed to the cause of freedom and equality. The involvement of African American soldiers in the Union Army had a significant impact on the war effort and the broader struggle for civil rights. By the end of the war, nearly 200,000 African Americans had served in the Union Army and Navy, playing a crucial role in the Union's ultimate victory. The Emancipation Proclamation also had profound international implications, particularly in relation to Britain and France. At the beginning of the Civil War, both Britain and France had been sympathetic to the Confederacy, largely because of their reliance on Southern cotton for their textile industries. The Confederacy had hoped that Britain and France might recognize their independence and intervene on their behalf. However, once Lincoln framed the war as a fight to end slavery, public opinion in Europe shifted. Both Britain and France had already abolished slavery, and the idea of supporting a government that was fighting to preserve the institution of slavery became politically untenable. The Emancipation Proclamation effectively ended any chance that Britain or France would recognize the Confederacy or provide it with substantial military or economic aid. In addition to its impact on the Union war effort and international relations, the Emancipation Proclamation also led to significant societal changes both in the North and the South. In the North, the proclamation was met with a mixed reaction. Abolitionists and radical Republicans celebrated the decision, seeing it as a long overdue step toward ending slavery and advancing the cause of equality. For many in the North, the Emancipation Proclamation gave the war a higher moral purpose, transforming it from a conflict solely about preserving the Union to a fight for human rights and freedom. However, not everyone in the North supported the proclamation. Many Northern Democrats, especially those in the border states and areas with strong racist sentiments, opposed the Emancipation Proclamation. They argued that Lincoln had overstepped his authority and that the proclamation would make it harder to reunite the country after the war. Some Northern whites also feared that the end of slavery would lead to an influx of African Americans into Northern cities where they would compete for their jobs. This fear contributed to racial tensions in the North, and in some cases, it led to violent opposition. The most notable example of the resistance came in July 1863 when anti-draft riots broke out in New York City. The draft, which was instituted to provide fresh troops for the Union Army, disproportionately affected poor immigrants, many of whom saw the war as a conflict fought on behalf of African Americans. The rioters targeted African American communities in the city, attacking black citizens and destroying homes and businesses. The New York City draft riots were a stark reminder of the deep racial divisions that still existed in the North, even as the Union fought to end slavery in the South. In the South, the Emancipation Proclamation was met with outrage and defiance. Southern leaders dismissed the proclamation as an illegal and meaningless act, since it applied only to Confederate-held territory where Lincoln had absolutely no authority. However, for enslaved people in the South, the proclamation represented hope and a promise of freedom. Although the proclamation did not immediately free the vast majority of enslaved people, it encouraged many to flee to the Union lines or resist their masters in other ways. As Union forces advanced into Confederate territory, they were often greeted by enslaved people who sought refuge and freedom. Many of these individuals would go on to enlist in the Union Army, further contributing to the Union war effort. The Emancipation Proclamation also had a profound impact on the Confederate war effort. By declaring enslaved people in Confederate territory free, Lincoln aimed to destabilize the Southern economy, which was heavily dependent on slave labor. As enslaved people fled or resisted, the Confederacy faced shortages of labor, which affected agriculture, manufacturing, and even the military. Enslaved people had been used to support the Confederate war effort by working as laborers, building fortifications, and performing other essential tasks. With the Emancipation Proclamation, the Union sought to undermine this critical support system, further weakening the Confederacy's ability to sustain the war. Despite the challenges and resistance, the Emancipation Proclamation marked a turning point in the Civil War and American history. It set the stage for the eventual abolition of slavery across the entire United States, which would be achieved by the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. The Emancipation Proclamation also reshaped the goals of the Union war effort, giving the North a clear moral cause to fight for. By aligning the war with the cause of freedom and human rights, Lincoln galvanized support for the Union both domestically and internationally. The role of African American soldiers, particularly units like the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, demonstrated the importance of African American participation in the war. Their bravery and sacrifice helped shift public perceptions and laid the groundwork for future advances in civil rights. The Emancipation Proclamation did not end the struggle for freedom and equality, but it was a crucial step forward in the long fight for civil rights in the United States. For African Americans, the proclamation symbolized hope and the possibility of a future free from the chains of slavery. For the Union, it provided a new sense of purpose and direction in a war that had already claimed countless lives. In the North, the proclamation helped rally support for the Union cause, even as it faced internal divisions and resistance from those who opposed the emancipation. In the South, the proclamation represented both a threat and an opportunity. While Southern leaders rejected the proclamation and continued to fight for the preservation of slavery, many enslaved people saw it as a chance to escape bondage and fight for their freedom. As the war continued, the principles outlined in the Emancipation Proclamation would influence the way the conflict was fought and the terms of peace that would eventually be negotiated. The societal changes brought about by the Emancipation Proclamation were not limited to immediate effects of the war. The proclamation laid the foundation for the broader social and political transformations that would follow during the Reconstruction and beyond. The abolition of slavery, the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, and the eventual push for civil rights in the 20th century were all part of the legacy of the Emancipation Proclamation. Lincoln's decision to issue the proclamation was both a strategic military move and a bold declaration for the Union's commitment to justice and equality. The Emancipation Proclamation remains one of the most important documents in American history, not only for its immediate impact on the Civil War, but also its enduring significance in the fight for civil rights. By declaring that slavery was incompatible with the principles of freedom and democracy, the proclamation helped redefine the United States and set the stage for a more just and equitable society. The legacy of the Emancipation Proclamation can still be found today, as Americans continue to grapple with the issues of race, freedom, and equality that have shaped the nation since its founding. In conclusion, the Emancipation Proclamation was a transformative moment in the American Civil War and in American history. It reshaped the Union war effort, bolstered international support for the North, and paved the way for eventual abolition of slavery. The participation of African American soldiers, like those in the 54th Massachusetts Regiment, highlighted the critical role that African Americans played in the fight for their own liberation. The proclamation also sparked societal changes and resistance in both the North and the South, reflecting the deep divisions that would continue to shape the nation for years to come. Ultimately, the Emancipation Proclamation was a crucial step toward the fulfillment of a promise of freedom and equality in the United States.